Professor Michael Quinlan has led two inquiries into how pay rates affect road safety for truck drivers. The first was in 2001 for the New South Wales government, and in 2008 he was engaged by the Gillard government to prepare a report for the National Transport Commission. Professor Quinlan is the director of the Industrial Relations Research Centre at the University of New South Wales, and he spoke to me earlier from Launceston. Professor, the Employment Minister Michaelia Cash today told the ABC that this is not a safety issue. What is the evidence linking rates of pay to safety issues such as crashes or speeding?
Well, Kim, it is a safety issue. There is substantial evidence linking pay and remuneration systems in the trucking industry to safety, and that is why the tribunal was established in the first place.
Can you give me an example?
Well, the research actually dates back over 25 years. The first research was undertaken by Professor David Henshaw at Sydney University in the early 1990s. In that decade, two very substantial surveys of truck drivers was done by Professor Anne Williamson of the University of New South Wales for the National Road Transport Commission, which was the precursor to the National Transport Commission. And she found that pay systems, particularly trip-based pay, which is the system under which virtually all owner-drivers work, was linked directly and significantly to fatigue and the use of stimulant drugs in the industry.
Couldn't it be argued, though, that drug use, speeding, that they would be greater safety issues than how much a driver is being paid?
You've got to look at the root cause of this. The studies clearly show that the payment system affects the hours drivers work, the fatigue, the speeds they drive at, corner cutting on safety, maintenance on vehicles. These are and use of stimulant drugs. Drivers use drugs to try and stay awake when they're doing excessive hours. And Professor Williamson found in her study that's published in the American Journal of Epidemiology that pay was the most significant predictor of fatigue and drug use. The Road Transport Authority has calculated the cost of fatalities in the industry. It was in 2013 dollars, it was $2.64 million for every road fatality. So you put that into 2016 terms, you're getting close to $3 million.
The Prime Minister says that the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal is going to drive owner-drivers out of business. He says it would make them uncompetitive with other larger businesses. What do you say to that?
Well, what I would say to that is that there have been contract determinations for for owner drivers in New South Wales over many years, and it hasn't driven them out of the industry. So I don't see why this would be the case for this decision. There will be some changes in the industry, obviously. Some employers will decide that they prefer to use employer drivers, others won't. Owner drivers have always been a very substantial part of the long-haul road transport industry, and in my view, they will remain a very substantial part of the long-haul road transport industry.
What evidence is there that increasing the rates of pay actually improves safety outcomes?
Well, there's actually very good evidence on this, and it's not just confined to Australia. There's very good evidence in the US. There's a professor there at Wayne State University called Professor Michael Bells, who's done a number of studies looking at the effect of pay on crashes. And he found that where one major transport company in the US lifted its wages significantly, there was a direct and significant reduction in the crash experience of that firm.
The profitability of the road transport sector, though, is quite low. It's a highly competitive industry. So couldn't a safe payment system prevent operators from competing on price and therefore drive them out of the industry, as the Prime Minister has argued?
No, I don't think so. What will happen is that those who have been exploiting owner drivers will be forced to pay rates which will make those businesses sustainable. What's not been mentioned in this debate is that since I did a first inquiry in 2001, there have been a substantial number of bankruptcies in the industry. Many of the owner drivers I spoke to talked about how they were essentially living on the edge, and this was under the existing regime because they couldn't bargain with those people up the chain. Under the safe rate system, whoever employs a driver directly or indirectly will have some responsibility to ensure that those drivers are paid adequate rewards, and it will enable small businesses and owner drivers to have a more sustainable business model. It will also encourage firms in the industry to look at efficiencies in other areas and simply cutting labour costs, which is what has been happening in the industry over the last decade.
The federal government is adamant that it's going to introduce legislation next week to abolish the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal. We don't yet know if it's got the numbers to get that legislation through the Senate, for example. What's your message to Senate crossbenchers who could ultimately decide the fate of this?
I would ask the Senate crossbenchers to go and look at the evidence which is readily available and to remember that every road fatality in the industry, every safety, probably not just fatalities, the injuries, the mental illness in the industry from drivers being pushed too hard, has a significant community cost, and the drivers and the wider community who use the roads will benefit from this legislation.
Professor Michael Quinlan, Director of the Industrial Relations Research Centre at the University of New South Wales, speaking to me from Launceston.